relation between the flux and the number of particles. Fine, so we see that there is a state, maybe with a gap, and some nice collective mode on top of it. So this gap is certainly something that we want to persist to the thermodynamic limit. So the only simple thing you can do is that you measure this gap as a function of the number of particles and you extrapolate. And it seems that it doesn't go to zero, so that there is plausibly a gap towards what we will call neutral excitations. Okay, we don't change the magnetic flux, we don't change the number of particles. Fine, but we want now to check something which is, so that's in line with the idea that the physics of the hardcore V1 model is continuously related to the physics of the Coulomb case. Great. But then there is this story with these quasi-particles with these fractional charges. So that's something we also want to check. So to do that, we have to find what is the relation between the flux and the number of particles to create these charged quasi-particles. Okay? So let me do this. We were able to write down the Laughlin wave function on the sphere. Okay. So now let's look at the quasi-hole. For finding the quasi-hole, I just follow the same strategy as we did on the disk, which is I take the wave function at filling factor unity and I just punch a hole in it. So this is the Vandermonde determinant in the lowest Landau level of the sphere. If now I remove one orbital, it's still a Vandermonde determinant, and you find that the one hole, it's not yet a quasi-hole because it's just the filling factor unity. It's obtained by making the product of all u's to the power 1 times the wave function of the completely filled level. Okay, good. So we guess that we can make one quasi-hole, so that's exact. We can guess that the quasi-hole will be obtained by making the product of this factor onto the Laughlin state. If you want the relation between the flux of and the number of particles, you just compute the total degree. That's very simple. And then you find that the n phi is the same as the fiducial Laughlin state plus 1. So you add one flux quantum and you should create this quasi-hole. Now this state, it's no longer a singlet of angular momentum, because you see that you've decided to put here exactly n electrons, n e electrons, and each has a spin, let's say, not spin, angular momentum 1/2, which means that the LZ of this guy, it's 1/2 times the number of electrons. Of course, you can change the angular momentum, and then you can create a whole manifold of states with a total angular momentum which is just 1/2 of the number of electrons. So that's the prediction for the quasi-hole. Okay, and if it is well defined, it should appear as a state clearly separated from the rest of the spectrum. That's it. So now it's for a smaller number of particles, which I completely forgot. And you see that, no, which I don't forget because it's 3/2. Right, so it's for 7 fermions. Okay, so here you have 7 fermions. Okay, and you take this relation here, which means that the number of flux quanta is so 19. Okay, so you create one quasi-hole, and indeed you find a state which is very well separated from the rest of the spectrum, which has an energy gap with respect to the Laughlin ground state, which you know for the same number of particles, so you can compare and you can estimate the gap for the creation of this quasi-hole. And it has an angular momentum which is exactly given by NE over 2. So now this guy, it has a finite angular momentum, so it's no longer a state which is round, but it's the quantum number of some particle which is moving on the sphere. You can make a drawing, of course, of the corresponding generalized harmonic, spherical harmonics wave functions for such a state. So it's a state which is localized with a dimension of the order of the magnetic length and which can occupy several states on the sphere. And you see that there is something, there is a way, there is an important way of characterizing this, is that if you take a single electron, okay, a single electron in the lowest Landau level, it has an angular momentum which is 1/2 of the flux. That's what we found by just finding the lowest Landau level basis wave functions, okay? Now we find that the quasi-particle has an angular momentum which is 1/2 of the density of the total number of particles. So which means that you can say that the density is to quasi-particles what flux is to particles. Okay? So there is some kind of transformation of flux towards density when you are moving from elementary particles to the quasi-particles. Yes.
It was the state with the angular momentum 0, which was down, and now I don't see it. Why?
Because the ground state.
13 particles, for 13 particles.
I have added one flux quantum, and then now the ground state does no longer have zero angular momentum. It's not a state which is uniform. It's a state with a guy which is moving on the sphere, and it's moving with a very special way, which corresponds to a flux which is transformed into the density. The same applies for the quasi-electron. For the quasi-electron wave function, you can make a guess, which is simply replacing u by d over du, then with the consequence that the angular momentum is exactly the same, and then in the relation between the flux and the density, instead of adding one flux quantum, you remove one flux quantum, and then you find what is called the quasi-electron. Again, for 7 electrons, there is one well-defined state, widely separated from the excited state, and which costs a finite amount of energy. And if we measure the way how it depends on the number of particles, then there is evidence for a gap that persists in the thermodynamic limit. Fine. So we have the picture of a state, a liquid state, the Laughlin state, a liquid state with a gap towards collective excitations, and which has charged excitations, quasi-electrons, quasi-particles, which also have a finite cost in energy. But then, of course, quasi-particles with fractional charges, that's for sure. So the question is, how do they interact? Can we understand what happens if we deviate more and more strongly away from the magic filling factor 1/3? If you tune the magnetic field away, so you increase the number of flux quanta or you decrease it, but of course by many, many units, which means that you will create many, many particles when you go from one side or the other side of 1/3. So maybe you can say, okay, I'm going to create a gas of these quasi-particles. These quasi-particles, they are charged. They will interact. They feel the magnetic field. So maybe at some point they will also have their own quantum Hall effect. That's an idea which is appealing, but which is very complicated in detail. So I'm going to show you why it is so complicated, and then how we can replace this idea by a simpler idea which is very effective, which is the composite fermion theory. Let's create two quasi-holes. Okay, so it's again 7 electrons, and we have one quasi-hole. One quasi-hole, it has an orbital angular momentum which is 7.5, right? Okay, 3.5. One quasi-hole. I don't change the number of electrons, I change the number of flux quanta. Let's create two such guys. And let's look at the spectrum. So here there are no speculations, whatever. You just compute the spectrum. No fancy exercise.
ELPS dans la pièce 50 dans 5 minutes. Je répète, rassemblement.
We still have 5 minutes.
What is it?
No, they are going to have some meeting, whatever. Okay, let's go back to the quasi-particles, okay? So, two flux quanta, so we guess that we are going to create two such quasi-particles, if this makes sense, okay? So now these quasi-particles, imagine that there are bosons, okay? If there are bosons, we know that the angular momentum is 7.5. If we construct the two-body states with such guys, okay, then we will add the angular momentum of these particles. And so the angular momentum that we should find for two particles should be 7, 5, 3, 1. These are the values of the angular momentum to make symmetric states. Other intermediate values are antisymmetric. That's just the theory of adding two angular momentum. That's what you see. There is a state with angular momentum 7, 5, 3, 1. So maybe they are bosons. If they were fermions, the quantum numbers would have been 6, 4, 2, 0. This is clearly not the case. Okay, that's two quasi-holes. Let's now create two quasi-electrons and try to do the same. It doesn't work. It doesn't really work because you see that 7 is missing and the angular momentum is the same. So naive application of the same reasoning would lead to the same values of the angular momentum, but you see that you just find 1, 3, 5. And okay, you can argue that 7 is here, but that's cheating a little bit. Okay? So now so they are not simply bosons or fermions. That's what I would like to argue on this. Let's now create 4 quasi-holes and see if we can understand something. Of course, we guess that if we create many particles, too many quasi-particles, maybe it will be too complicated and we don't understand anything. Anyway, that's not what happens. If we create, okay, I've not made a picture with 3 quasi-holes because there is not much to understand. But let's look at 4 quasi-holes, okay? You see that there is a set of states which I would say is relatively well defined without much imagination. Are you going to buy this? More or less, yes. You see that there is this banana-shaped part of the spectrum which is quite well separated. And then there is again a guy who has 0 angular momentum, which is a candidate to be some kind of liquid. It's uniform, so it's not something who is walking on the sphere. It's really maybe likely a candidate for for a liquid state. So you see that there is evidence for the fact that if you create a finite number of these quasi-particles, they are going to recondense into some kind of new liquid. So that's the idea of the hierarchy. Okay? So let's try again this story of bosons. After all, we guess that these are 4 bosons, okay? And we said that the flux, in fact, it's the number of particles. That's what I tried to tell you by looking at the angular momentum of the one quasi-Hall state, okay? So let's look now at the problem of 4 bosons, okay, with a flux which is equal to the number of electrons of this picture, which is 7. And then we can do the same, okay? We can make diagonalization of the spectrum for 4 bosons in the lowest Landau level. And what will be the interaction? I'm not going to take the Coulomb interaction, but let's look at this picture. You see that the bosons, they are very close together. The closest they can be is for the highest total angular momentum. When you look at the total angular momentum, the maximum value of the angular momentum of the states of 2 such guys, it's the guy in which the bosons are closest. So you see that it's clear that the highest energy state, it's when precisely the angular momentum is the maximum value, which means that it's close to be a contact interaction if you believe that the energy scale of these is much lower than the energy of the last state. Okay, maybe not that convincing, but let's do the calculation. That's what we see. And let's take 4 bosons with the density which is equal to the number of electrons, and then, ta-ta! Let's look at this. It's quite spectacular. It matches extremely well. You can, maybe I will do this quickly so that you have time to check all levels. You see, it works completely. No, not okay, this one. So there is one-to-one correspondence. Exactly, all quantum numbers match. Of course, not the energies. It's not. Okay.
The scale, the energy.
Absolutely.
But
No, absolutely. Absolutely. But then you see that clearly by changing these fermions into bosons, we get an exact match of the spectrum, which means that presumably we can change the flux and then map a problem onto another problem. Great, but then it's not going to simplify life a lot because it seems that the quasi-particles have complicated properties. Oops. Wow. So now I'm going to sell you another idea. Instead of studying the interactions between these quasi-particles, let's go back to the picture we had in the real experiments of the quantum Hall effect. Is that spectacular? Yes. This one is not that bad. At low field, you see that there are oscillations in the resistance, and we argue that this is a very simple phenomenon, which is the oscillation of the density of states. So that anything you measure which is sensitive to the density of states should have oscillations. Okay. But then you see that it's also the same when you look at this part of the figure. There are also big oscillations. They look very much like this. Let's make a close-up. That's it. That's the picture of the integer quantum Hall effect. It starts at 0 field. Okay? Then it goes to filling factor unity. You see the plateaus, you see the zeros in the resistance. Great. Let's look at the fractional part of this figure. But then we shift that so that filling factor, we take the plateaus that we've seen in the picture, which corresponds to filling factor 1/2. And we go up to 1/3. You see that from a phenomenological point of view, it's exactly the same. Okay? There is a complete matching. Which means that if I'm going to translate the magnetic field, I can really put these pictures on top of each other. It works even, that's a bit surprising, it even works for these kinks on the top of the curve. That's very surprising, but anyway, it works. So you can translate the picture and it's the same. Let me write down an equation for this.
I'm sorry, you would like
Yes.
to make only this big thing, not the left part. What you would like to make?
Everything.
Everything I don't
I want-
understand because I see on
No.
the right the maximum of the peaks they are growth, and on the left more or less not.
Okay, let me take a better picture. Look at this. This is 1/2, and I claim that this is like Shubnikov-de-Haas oscillations at no field. It grows with the field, exactly like close to 0. It grows with the field. Let's make this translation into equations. The filling factor. So the filling factor, we had this formula, density H over EB. Okay? So filling factor 1/2 means that you have 1/2 equal NHE B, let me call this 0. Otherwise, B0, this is equal to 2 times the density times the flux quantum. Okay? So the translation that we guess on this figure, let me go back to the figure that Natasha doesn't like very much, which I find pretty convincing, but anyway, okay? So this translation means that there is an effective magnetic field which is B minus this B naught, B minus 2n times phi naught. And I claim that it seems that I can match really all the physical properties provided I do this translation. What is the consequence? Imagine that this magic has to do with the Landau level physics. And let's look at the filling factor. So the filling factor, the formula is written here. You see that B is 1 over, it's the inverse of the filling factor times the density times the flux quantum. Okay, which means that this relation, this translation in terms of B, can be written as 1 over nu effective, let's say, which is 1 over nu minus 2. Okay, which means, for example, that 1/3 is mapped onto 1. Okay? So what does it mean that we see the integer quantum Hall effect? The integer quantum Hall effect is just this closed shell phenomenon due to non-interacting particles. So this happens when this nu effective, it's an integer. Okay? If it is an integer, you see that it means that, so u effective equal, let's say, p, an integer. This means that this transformation claims that there are fractional quantum Hall states for fractions that are p over 2p plus 1. And then it works, because you see that these are the most prominent fractions. 2/5, 3/7, 4/9, 5/11, and so on. Let me go back now to a much nicer picture. If I look between 1/3 and 1/2, then I see all these fractions up to 10 over 11. So the simple matching of the effective magnetic flux means to the idea that likely the Landau levels if Landau levels are formed in the effective flux, they will precisely explain the most obvious fractions seen in the experiment. It may be that this effective field is negative, which means that in this case, if the effective field is negative, you will simply fill the Landau levels with the conjugate wave function, and that leads to fractions defined by p over 2p minus 1, which you see also in the experiments. It's the fractions that are between 1 and 1/2, 3/2, no, sorry, 2/3, and so on. Okay? This does not completely exhaust the fractions that are observed in experiments, but it seems that we are on a very good way to explain almost everything. There are obvious generalizations in the sense that you can also start from the Laughlin wave function with an exponent which is 5, which is tailored to explain what would happen at filling factor 1/5. And then the same idea would apply with now a shift of the magnetic field, which would be 4n phi naught. And if there are also effective Landau levels that are forming with this effective field, it would mean to the prediction of fractions at p over 4p plus 1 as well as p over 4p minus 1. These are seen. These are the fractions that are on this part of the figure. Well, okay, that's good. But then there is much to understand. So the idea of Jainendra Jain was to use this correspondence and to cook up trial wave functions that gives us candidates to all these states. So the idea is pretty simple. In this effective field, so the name he has introduced to call the electrons living in this pseudomagnetic field, it's to call them composite fermions. So let me write down wave functions. We start from the Laughlin wave function. After all, it's the mother of all fractions. Okay? So the cube of this Vandermonde determinant can be written. There are many ways to write this identity times a factor with the power of 2 times the wave function for a field Landau level. That's a trivial identity, okay? Now, if we guess that in the pseudomagnetic field we are filling more Landau levels, okay, then imagine that we change this part of the wave function. So we introduce a wave function which is, we keep this factor, and then we write down a wave function with p field Landau levels, okay, real Landau levels. Then you see that it certainly has to do something with this transformation, because this factor is spreading away the particles, so which means that it's reducing the density, so it's reducing the filling factor, okay? That's fine. That's a very decent and explicit wave function. But there is a catch, in the sense that if you look at the formula we wrote last week, this guy is a function of z and z star. So it's not in the lowest Landau level. Okay? Okay, let's project it. So we decide that the composite wave function, fermion wave function, it's the projection into the lowest level, Landau level, of this trial state. Okay, fine. How do we do the lowest Landau level projection? And the recipe is as follows. Each z star should be replaced by 2 d over dz, where the dz acts only on the polynomial part and not on the Gaussian. And that comes from a very simple calculation. Imagine that I look at the matrix elements between 2 functions in the lowest Landau level of z star. So I take the matrix elements of z star between 2 guys in the lowest Landau level. So this is function of z star, this is function of g. And then I've put all Gaussian factor, that's a star, all Gaussian factors together. Okay? So you see that this is simply integral of f star, g, and then z star, you can replace it by minus right, minus 2. Okay. D over dz, of the Gaussian part, d2r. Now you can integrate by parts, okay? And then the d over dz will act only on g and not on f star because it's a function of z star. So that's the integral of f star plus 2d over dz of g times the Gaussian part. So if you have a z star, the projection will replace it by 2d over dz, and that's all. So there is a concrete recipe to do the projection, is that you write down the polynomial, you put all your z stars on the left, replace it by derivative operators, and you just compute the derivative. Yes.
You mentioned that derivative doesn't touch the Gaussian.
Absolutely. But I just said so.
Now I see that it does. D over dz from the Gaussian.
No.
No. Just in the second line.
But that's the calculation, which proves that it doesn't touch the Gaussian.
This is not the Gaussian exponent minus.
No, that's the proof that this is equal to this, where the parenthesis closes here. So that's the proof it doesn't act on the Gaussian. Okay. So, and now if you compute the filling factor of this guy, then it's precisely the shift of the filling factor, it's precisely giving us these filling factors. So this is really the wave function for filling factor p over 2p plus 1. In practice, it's a bit inconvenient to first form, so this is a Slater determinant, and this is not some crazy wave function, whatever, it's a Slater determinant. You fill orbitals in a Slater determinant. So you guess easily that, so a Slater determinant has many elements, so adding the derivatives in this is a bit messy, because normally you first compute the Slater determinant and then you do the projection. So that's a bit complicated. So Jain has shown that it's in fact better to first compute the determinant and then make the projection onto each element of the Slater determinant. It's not exactly the same. It's not the same wave function, but anyway, it leads to very closely related values for the energies and scalar product or whatever. So in practice, it's a small variant of this wave function which is used for computing energies. So once you have a trial wave function, you can impose quantum numbers in the construction, which means that you have the choice of which orbitals you are occupying, and then you can compute energies explicitly. If you have an energy best formulated, of course, in real space, then you can compute energies by a simple Monte Carlo metropolis type procedure, because you have an explicit wave function, so it's not some complicated Monte Carlo. Does it work? Let me see. So that's a cartoon of this composite fermion wave function, ID. It means that essentially, if you have fermions, you will attach two flux tubes. That's the idea of this Jastrow factor. You can pictorially say that this corresponds to the attachments of two flux tubes onto each electron. And then you go back in the 1/3 case, you have 1/3 of the states that are occupied by electrons, but provided you do this Jastrow factor transformation, then you are back to a completely filled Landau level. And by the way, someone here asked about bosons. You can do the same operation in the bosonic case, in which case it means that bosons are mapped onto fermions with one of these flux attached. I will discuss that a bit later. So let me see. Let me convince you that it works pretty well. Yes, that's fine. So let's start by the neutral excitations at filling factor 1/3. So I showed you before this very nice spectrum in which you have an orbital angular momentum singlet state, and then you have this branch of collective excitations. If you want to construct the collective excitation, then the idea is very simple, because you occupy the lowest Landau levels in the lowest Landau level in the effective magnetic field, and then there is the next effective Landau level, which is completely empty. So you will make a simple particle hole excitation in which you will promote one of the guys from the lowest Landau level to the next one. And if you compute the angular momentum of this excitation, it will give me a branch of states. Since they have an orbital character which is different, then there is nothing like the symmetrization of the two quasi-old states that we discussed before. Here, all values of the angular momentum are realized. So there are no holes. It's not going from 2 by 2. It's really going from 1 to 1. And this branch extends exactly till the number of particles. And this is really exactly what we observe. 10 particles. The flux is chosen so that we have filling factor 1/3. That's the ground state with zero angular momentum. That's the branch of the collective mode. It ends exactly at the value of the angular momentum, which is the number of particles, as predicted by this shell excitation picture. And the small lines are the values obtained by exact diagonalization of the Coulomb Hamiltonian, while the dots are the energies obtained by using the composite fermion wave functions. And you see that it describes extremely well this branch of collective excitations. So that's 8 particles, 10 particles, and so that's fine. We have both the shape and the energies. Everything matches perfectly well. Let's now look at a more stringent test. It's the first non-trivial fraction, which is 2/5, in which you believe that there are two pseudo-Landau levels that are occupied. So now to construct the ground state wave function, you will decide that you occupy two Landau levels here, okay, and then you do this mechanism to generate a wave function. So you have a state which has zero angular momentum, and then the excited states are created by taking a particle from the second Landau level to the third Landau level, okay? So the composite fermion construction gives you the quantum numbers as well the energies. So let me draw a fictitious case in which you have two filled shells and one open shell, and then the lowest energy excitations means that you will promote a composite fermion from the second Landau level to the third one. And then again, you predict a set of quantum numbers, quite small because there are not so many particles. And then the energies match exactly what we find from exact diagonalizations. 3 sevens, now you fill 3 pseudo-Landau levels, and then again it's the same success. You predict both the correct quantum numbers as well as the energies. We can even change the Coulomb potential quite a lot, and these trial wave functions still give excellent results in the sense that energies and level ordering are very well predicted. So let's see that it's also, so that was for completely filled shells, okay? So fractions, the most prominent fractions seen in experiments, so P over 2P plus 1. So I showed that for the first 3 fractions, okay? It also works with the quasi-particle, quasi-Hose states. So here you start from the fiducial Laughlin state with 8 electrons, and you create 1 quasi-electron, 2 quasi-electrons, 3 or 4 quasi-electrons. The first 2 pictures we've seen that before. 1 quasi-electron, it's an isolated state with an angular momentum which is half the number of particles, so it should be 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, it works, okay? And then 2 quasi-electrons, you get a set of states. Again, there is 1 state which is missing. If these guys were bosons, we would have said that since the angular momentum here is 4, so we would expect to see a branch that goes up to 8, which is not the case because it's 0, 2, 4, 6, and there is no 8th state. While what we see in the real spectrum is completely reproduced by the composite fermion scheme. We got both the correct quantum numbers as well as the energies, and this extends also to 3 or 4 quasi-electron states. Okay, so this theory works extremely well to describe the incompressible states that are giving rise to fractions. Okay, it reproduces their lowest lying excited states, so the presence of a gap can be checked by this composite fermion theory. And what you can do is that if you now decide that these are the correct wave functions, then you can expand the calculation of energy gaps to a very large number of particles and then do extrapolations using these trial wave functions. So that's the best way we have so far to obtain estimates of the gaps at the thermodynamic limit. When comparison is possible, then it works perfectly well with what we find from exact diagonalizations. Let me, okay, I will finish by this. Let me now do a calculation in which we have 6 electrons on a sphere, Coulomb interaction, yes, it's written on top. And then we change the number of flux quanta, and we compute the energy of the ground state, whatever its quantum numbers, okay? Just ground state energy as a function of the flux quantum. Changing the flux means changing the magnetic field, so we change the filling factor, okay? In the ground state energy, you see something very nice, is that you see cusps, okay? The derivative of the ground state energy with respect to the number of electrons or number of flux quanta, then this is related to the chemical potential, because as we know, the chemical potential is the derivative of the energy with respect to the number of particles. Of course, here we have only a discrete version of the curve of the chemical potential versus the number of flux quanta. But you see clearly that there are cusps, which means that there are discontinuities in the chemical potential versus the density. And that's very nice, because this is really the evidence for a gap. Imagine that you have a gap, for example, in a simple semiconductor. Then the chemical potential has a jump when you cross the gap, when you add or remove electrons. Okay? And of course, the way the chemical potential varies with the density is not the same when you are in the valence band or in the conduction band. So this is exactly what you see. There are discontinuities in the slopes, okay, indicative of a gap. If this curve persists in the thermodynamic limit, then this is exactly what we need to have a system which has a bulk gap. So provided this is representative of the infinite system, then we are done with the gap. So you see that the most prominent cusp happens for the fraction 1/3, which is good because we expect that this fraction has the biggest gap, so the biggest discontinuity in the slope. But you see that even with a very small system like this, you see many fractions. You see 2/5, the first fraction when you go to higher density with respect to 1/3. You see 2/3 which belongs to the series of P over 2P minus 1, so negative flux. It can also be seen, and that's correct, as the particle hole partner of 1/3. Okay, and you see that there are also cusps without much imagination. You see that there are cusps in the curve that corresponds to fractions descending from the mother state, which is not the 1/3 Laughlin state, but the Laughlin state at filling 1/5. So they do belong to this series of states. But clearly they do exist, even diagonalizing a system which is in fact very small. So that's okay. The lesson, I will just conclude on this today. We are quite lucky in the sense that the correlation lengths of these states are not very large, in the sense that we can capture the physics of such states even with a small number of particles. Okay, I will stop here for today. Next week we will discuss what happens at 1/2 filling, so when this B effective is 0, and then the role of spin on multi-component systems. Okay.
So you're labeling these fillings at their respective shifts, right? You have 1/3.
Exactly. Yes, right.
Can you just remind me how you get the shift for each one without the composite fermion picture already?
No, it's with the composite fermion.
That's how you determine the shift rate?
Absolutely.
You can't tell it a priori?
No, that's with the shift taken from the composite fermion. Yes?
Can we say a little bit about the magnitude of the gap presented in this kind of system? Because you talk about the gap and you never talk about the magnitude of this gap. So
Right.
what is-
The biggest gap is obtained for the fraction 1/3. So it's a dimensionless number times the Coulomb energy scale. Okay, and it seems that extrapolations should lead to something like 0.1 times E squared over epsilon L, the Coulomb energy scale. That's the order of magnitude of the gap for filling factor 1/3 and pure Coulomb interaction. In real experiments, the gap which is observed is always smaller or even much smaller than what we predict from theory. So there are several reasons for that. One is that the potential is likely not to be pure Coulomb, in the sense that there is an extent of the wave function in the direction perpendicular to the plane, which leads to a softening of the Coulomb potential. This is something you can include in such calculations. It leads to a smaller gap, but even that is not in good agreement with experiments, and certainly, well, the usual argument is to invoke that disorder is doing something which we can't compute. Yes, Bill?
What's the gap in graphene so much smaller?
I don't know for graphene. I've not seen values for that. I mean, in Kelvin, the gap is much larger in graphene. That's for sure. Okay, it's much larger, which means that likely you don't need the very low temperatures to see the fractional effect. In absolute terms, yes. Yes.
Is there a formulation of this composite fermion something theoretical? Because this idea of
Yes.
gas
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
in other
The shift.
contexts you can do it with slave with auxiliary particles. I wonder whether you can work also.
There is a change of the magnetic field, okay? This can be realized by the Chern-Simons field theory. So this is a field theoretic way to implement this. So it's, okay, I'm not sure I will have time to describe that. Yes.
Okay.
But yes, there is a well-defined field theoretic construction that corresponds to this, which is very appealing in the sense that it gives you an access to many quantities in terms of quantum numbers, which is not that great in the sense that it doesn't need to quantitative estimate. Okay.